Hey everyone, thank you for joining us for today's session titled Cannabis and Religion. The purpose of this conversation is to discuss the relationship between cannabis and religion, a relationship that can be historically summed up as opposing. But with the wave of legalization taking place across the country, it's time we seriously re examine weed and religion. I'm Johnita Dawkins. I'm a member of Chicago Normal, and I'm excited to be one of your hosts for today. I would like to introduce to you our speakers. We have Rachel Dawson. Rachel is an attorney and a former assistant appellate defender for the state of Illinois. Relying on her science background, she now manages a healthcare research initiative in Michigan. Rachel is a devout Christian and a preacher's kid and has served as a president of the church youth council and a judicial officer for her denomination from 2008 to 2012. Rachel is a devout Christian and preacher's kid and has served as president of her church youth council and a judicial officer for her denomination from 2008 to 2012. Rachel earned her bachelor's degree from the University of Michigan and a law degree from Indiana University Maurer School of Law. And we also have with us today Reverend Jonathan Tennial of Calvary Baptist Church of Chicago. Reverend Jonathan Tennial is a native of Chicago, Illinois, and a sixth generation Baptist preacher. He is the eldest son of John and Gail Tennial. Reverend Tennial enrolled at Xavier University of Illinois as a pre-pharmacy major. It was during this time that he received his calling from God, and God began to pull on him. He holds a bachelor's degree with a concentration in mass communication broadcasting with a minor in theology. After graduating from Xavier University, Reverend Tennial embarked on study at Wake Forest University School of Divinity. Upon his graduation from Wake Forest University, Reverend Tennial was the first recipient of the Worship Leader Award for the graduating student, exemplifying extraordinary leadership in the worship life of the Divinity School community. Reverend Tennial has a vast array of work experience, and he's currently working with BAM, an organization that focuses on youth development. What are your individual views on cannabis and religion? We will start with you, Rachel.
Great, thank you. When you look at my individual views, I think we have to look at cannabis and its two main categories of use, as far as medicinal use and then recreational use. As someone who works in the healthcare industry, but also just as a Christian, we consider medicine and medical advancements to be blessings from God. And I think it was a very long path to recognition and scientific validation, but I believe that it has been proven that there is significant medicinal value in cannabis and the products that are made from cannabis. And so on a personal level, as far as the medicinal use of cannabis, I'm very supportive. I've seen it have very significant impact on people's lives. I mentioned that Edie was my good friend. I saw the journey that she took when her mother was sick and how that helped her through cancer. I've had another very close friend who had to go through cancer at a very young age, and how using medicinal cannabis really helped her deal with the impact and side effects of chemotherapy. So I'm very supportive of cannabis on a medicinal level. When it comes to recreational use, though, and as a devout Christian, I have no opposition to its legalization. I personally do not use, I personally would not use, because when we read our scriptures and try and live within the will of God, I think there is a number of scriptures in our Christian teachings that would say that the recreational use of cannabis is problematic from a Christian standpoint.
I didn't realize the significance of medicinal usage until very recently. In college, it was the thing that everyone was doing, right? It's recreationally, and so I always thought of marijuana as not having any medicinal purposes or being any use medicinally. But I had a relative who was diagnosed with cancer a while back, and one of the things that this person did use recreationally previously in their life, and they found that it was comforting. It relieved some of the pain that they were experiencing. It gave them an appetite when they did not want to eat, and so it gave me a different kind of perspective on it. Now, with it being now legalized here in Illinois for recreational use as well, I'm trying to put it into perspective from a religious standpoint of what it must have been like for the church during the time of prohibition of alcohol, right? Which is something that we still struggle with. The church still struggles with this experience. What do we do with alcohol? How do we feel about alcohol? You know, the pastor comes to the wedding and everyone's watching to see if the pastor's going to drink at the reception, right? And so, and there are some pastors who have lost their placement, their jobs, because they went to a wedding reception and had maybe one glass of wine. They weren't necessarily drunk. And so I think the thing that we must hold on to as when it comes to anything, and I'm not speaking just specifically of weed or alcohol, when it comes to anything, in moderation. And I think it can be useful for some people recreationally in moderation. It can be helpful, I think, in that regard. But it's when we get above, when it seems to have control or power over us, that I think it can be problematic.
If you had somebody that was, we call them kind of curious, you know, what would you suggest to someone who is religiously devout, but is kind of curious, you know, whether that's medicinal, or whether that's recreational, you know, what if they approached you, you know, as somebody, you know, who is spiritual and it could guide them, what kind of advice would you give them?
I think I always like to give people, one, it's our job as Christians to give them the word. And then, like God, they have to make choices. So when we look at the word of God, it was interesting as I was preparing for this, I was talking to my father and my sister last night about the recreational use. And when I told them how I was thinking about it, they gave me some new perspective that I think I would want to share with someone who's kind of curious as a Christian. First, as the pastor mentioned, it's about excess use. When we think about drugs, well, not drugs, but alcohol, typically in the Christian setting, most Christians believe that it's okay to drink wine, for instance, as long as you don't use it in excess, because throughout the Bible, wine is used at festivities and events, but also for healing. And so they all, what the scripture continuously tells us is that we have to be sober of mind as a Christian, and to not do anything that is mind altering, that would impact our ability to make godly decisions or good judgment. And so that's one biblical perspective. And I think that's where a majority of people will probably land at. It's okay to do it as long as you don't do it in excess. Of course, THC, which is, you know, the intoxicating element of cannabis, is a bit different than alcohol. So people would have to think about that. But then, as my father was sharing, it's not only that we have to be sober mind, but remember, our bodies are to be a temple for God, a living sacrifice, and all that we do is to be to the glory of God. So as a Christian, you have to ask yourself, is smoking weed, or however you may consume it, to the glory of God? Is it violating my body as a temple and as a living sacrifice of God? And I would share those scriptures with them, and then I think they have to make that choice based on their level of comfort and their own personal relationship with God.
Well, I agree with Ms. Dawson. One added element I would add to that is a lot of ways culture and society shapes the way we view things that we experience in our culture. I think because it's been so looked down upon in our culture and in our society, you know, there's this kind of social image that we attribute to those who smoke weed. There's a image that we attribute to those who like alcohol, right? And so in our minds, I think we have to get outside of the box and not put people in boxes because of some of the activities that they participate in or things that they seem that they appreciate, that they like doing. And even, we jokingly use a scripture in Genesis 1 that says all of the plants of the earth are are yours to consume, right? It says to eat. But I know folks who will use that scripture as reference to say, I think it's Genesis 1:21, who use that scripture as a reference to say, hey, weed is in the Bible, it's okay, right? But we also have to look at the text in its context. And I think so often we take some of the things that were kind of taboo in the biblical ages are not at all now, right? The things that that Paul may be writing about in some of his writings, it's just women being quiet in church. It's just one that is kind of sticking out, jumping out at me right now. That's kind of taboo in a lot of places here. Where we're moving, in some churches that's still kind of, they hold tightly to that. But I think one of the things that we as Christians have to do is use the Bible to guide us, but not in a literal sense. And sometimes I think we take things in a literal sense and it causes us to place judgment, cast judgment, or look at people, put people in boxes that they don't deserve because they like to do something that our culture, our society says is taboo or is wrong. And, I know there could be a lot of pushback on that. But I think we have to, as the church, have to move out of our comfort zone if we would like people to get out of their comfort zones and to hear what it is that we have to say.
What you just pointed out is brilliant. I think you have to look at it from multiple angles and approach them in a way that's comfortable.
And I'll be honest, even in my college days, some of the most thought-provoking religious conversations happened amongst my friends. They knew I was the kid who I was going to church on Sunday. I don't care what we did on Saturday night. I was going to church on Sunday morning. Y'all sleeping with the hangover. I was going to church. And part of that was because I had different responsibilities. I was a musician. I was active. And so whenever they had questions of theodicy, questions about God, and how God was in there impacting their life or involved in their life and their situations, a lot of the times it happened as we were smoking together. This was in my college days before I was ordained and all of that.
You got to give it context. Let me get the timeline.
But some of the most thought-provoking questions arise in that experience of us sharing that time together. And believe it or not, there's a level of comfortability a lot of times that I think we as Christians miss out on when you don't have to participate in order to kind of get folks' ears or be a part of a conversation. And I think, we automatically say, oh, they do that, I don't do that. And so I'm going to distance myself from them. And it causes us to not be able to reach as many people as we would. But some of the most thought-provoking questions for some of my friends who did not go to church, for them, that was a moment of preaching, a moment of church for them, that they were able to have some conversation around God and who God is to me and how God shows up in my life in those kind of sessions.
I want to give a bit of pushback on that point. However, as Christians, we should be open to discussion. We should not be judgmental. We should make ourselves an open avenue and a comfortable space for people who are exploring religious questions or doubting how they should make decisions and things of that nature. But we also have to understand that even within a cultural context, God and his word are unchanging. And so even as we talk to people about, the use of cannabis, like I said, I think people have to make decisions for themselves. I probably, like I said, I have no opposition to the legalization of cannabis for recreational use. I would prefer that people not use it excessively, but I don't think as a Christian I would feel comfortable just saying, oh yeah, get as blunted as you want it, because that's not what the Bible teaches us, because that will alter your mind and you will not be making decisions. I kind of laugh when the pastor mentioned, smoking in college, because although I never smoked, I definitely drank. And I often thought I was being my smartest when I was drinking. And frequently you learn later you were not. And so while I want to be open and welcoming to people and definitely not make them feel that I'm passing judgment against them, I have to give them the word. In its true form, in spirit and in truth. And so that's just what I want to, warn against in our attempt to connect with people on every level.
Do you think that there is a divider here that's based on age, like where the old school is set in this mentality, this religious mentality, and then the new school is being brought up to kind of accept this and bring it into a new way of thinking? Would you agree with that, or what would you guys say?
I would argue that there are more older, and when I say older, I'm saying 50 plus, who smoke than we'd like to admit. I'm learning that the older I get, that there is, it was like when I was in college, I thought it was something that only folks our age did. And, after a while, you kind of outgrow it. And, for some people that is true. But I'm finding that there are a lot of older people who are regular marijuana smokers. And they're able to function and go about their day. It doesn't cause any issues or any problems. And so I think, kind of touching on that question, I think there is a divide kind of religiously in that aspect. And maybe not just by age. Some of us who are raised in church and we've been taught that you don't do this. This is not of God. That is not of God. Some of us may hold on to those stronger than others. And then there are some who did not come up with that upbringing, who are millennials, and they believe, hey, this is, I'm not hurting anybody. I'm not harming anyone. It's a personal choice that I'm making. But then you've got some older folks who, my mom's age, 60 and plus, and they just think, you're not supposed to do that. You're not supposed to do this. You're not. And so they've been conditioned and taught that is what they, how they're supposed to behave. That these are things that are not becoming of Christians. And so they shy away from them. But I think the flip side of that is there are quite a few who undercover are in our churches, in the pews, very active, and in their personal time, they are smoking marijuana. I mean, it is a reality. I'm discovering, as a pastor, I'm discovering that more and more. And I'm like, wait, really? You like it? And now it's almost not a shock. It's like, oh, okay. I never would have imagined you, but okay, right? No judgment. But I think it's a reality, and I think the legalization of it in a lot of places is kind of removing the blinders, opening up the curtains and allowing some people and a lot of people to say, hey, I've been doing this for years. Now I can do it legally with no ramifications. But then again, in the back of their mind, there's this idea, but if I do it publicly and my church members find out, or people who look up to me as far as they're watching my witness, people I want to inspire may look at me differently because this is something that I do. And so trying to figure out how to navigate that, how to play this balancing game of not being judgmental, but still giving folks grace to kind of grow in God. And so, yeah, I think that's the struggle, balancing that.
Do you think one can practice and consume THC at the same time?
Practice their faith.
Practice their faith.
I do. I think the practice of our faith, in the way that I understand practicing our faith, at the very core of that is love. And the fact that someone consumes marijuana, however I don't think that takes away from their love. Now, the body being a temple, the God within our temples, our physical temples. And so that part is still kind of hazy to me on how we can correlate those two, bring all of that together. But I know some people who consume marijuana, who smoke marijuana, THC included. And if you had not smoked with them or saw them, you would never know that that's something that they do because their faith is so alive and real. They practice that love. Their faith is strong. They're encouragers for everyone else. They bear the fruit of the Spirit, and the gifts of the Spirit. And for some of them, they consume marijuana. And so, am I going to say that Am I going to say that they're less of a Christian because of that one thing, or are they Christian-like because they have the fruit of they possess, they display the fruit of the Spirit, and you exercise their gifts of the Spirit? I'm going to say no. They are fully Christian, and so I think the two can go hand in hand, but there's a fine, very, very fine line.
Rachel, how do you feel? Do you feel one can practice and consume at the same time?
Right. Absolutely. Before I even address THC directly, I want to say everybody sins multiple times every day, right? And there are just in our society, in the Christian society, especially in the American version of Christianity, there are just certain things we obsess about more than other sins, sexuality, drugs and alcohol, but we all sin multiple times every day. And so absolutely, Christianity is a journey. We all fall short of grace. And so none of us sit perfect. So absolutely, you could be a practicing Christian in different parts of your faith. Some of us are weak in faith at times. Sometimes our faith is stronger. But as it relates to THC, absolutely, you can, because like I said, one, it's about, are you using it to the point of excess where you are no longer sober in mind, or are you using it responsibly? But even if you are using it at points of excess sometimes, that's part of the Christian journey. And that's something someone has to, work through and reconcile with God around. But yes, all of us engage in something that we struggle with. So like he said, there's that fine line of, is this to the glory of God? Is this violating my temple as a living sacrifice? But I think responsible use, absolutely, you can walk in your faith and use cannabis.
What would you say to religious communities that are anti-cannabis?
I think like I said, at my starting point, I would really struggle with a Christian community that still oppose the medicinal use of cannabis, because I don't know what grounding they have, even looking at scripture, what they're relying on, unless they are those pure faith healers and they just don't believe in the use of medicine, and more power to them. As far as the recreational use, again, I totally understand that viewpoint. I think scriptures support that viewpoint, but I think again the important thing is that the church is supposed to be helping people with their Christian journey, and we're supposed to be welcoming. So we should not be shunning people, no matter what they may be struggling with that we may not disagree with. If anything, we're supposed to be there for their healing and not for their discrimination and disconnect from a Christian community.
Reverend Tennial, what would you say to religious communities that are anti-cannabis?
I would say Christianity in America, religious communities in America are so diverse. You could have two Baptist churches that are part of the same umbrella, but they have very different beliefs, very, very vastly different beliefs on the same exact view. And I think that's the beauty of religious life in America, that there is this freedom to serve God in the way that you see fit. And so yours may not, the way you believe God to intercede or interact in your life may not be the same for me. But I think I am one who believes in this religious pluralism. Okay, that's your belief. It's not my job to force my beliefs on you, just as I would hope that you would respect my beliefs. And so, to those who are anti cannabis, more power to you. That's not my. That may not be my where I sit, where I rest. That's not where I rest with it. But the fact that we have differences allow us space to have better conversation and come to a better understanding. And so I don't think it would be my job to say anything to them if they're anti cannabis, because that's between them and God.
If I may, I mean, I think you both just touched on something really important within the religious space, and I think at the same time within the cannabis space. Oddly enough, right? Finding that common ground. It's education, right? I mean, I think this. How do you spread Christianity? How do you speak to people? Through education, right? You witness to them, you talk to them, you educate them on questions they might have. I think the same can be said for the cannabis community. There is a lot of misinformation, right? There are those individuals that oppose this, for no reason at all, and it's simply because there's a lack of education and there's a lack of understanding. And so we try to educate them, doing what we're doing now, having this beautiful, healthy dialogue. But I really want to highlight that because I thought it was a really cool point to highlight that, I think at some playing field, right, at some level, cannabis and religion kind of have the same problems, and they're trying to address those problems in the same manner.
I agree with what you're saying, Alex, that it is some similarities in cannabis and religion, but often I think that religion is used as a tool against cannabis, and it has been this tool for a very long time. Why do you think religion is used in that format to be anti-cannabis?
Well, one, I think based on scripture, there's plenty of scripture to support how especially the excess use, but any use, there's plenty of arguments for any use of mind-altering drugs or alcohol is against the word of God. And so I think Christians, especially more fundamental-based faiths, definitely have strong supporting arguments within our scriptures and teachings that would support that. But I also think, you talk about cultural practice. We got to keep it real, y'all. There, especially in America, the use of marijuana is tied to excess use and certain behaviors in our society. And so I think when you think of marijuana in America, there's certain famous people you attach it to who have certain images. For instance, you think of weed, you think of, Snoop Dogg. And you think of someone who's always high. You think of Method Man. And so you have these images of people that engage in what many would consider excess use and not something that people would consider what Christians ought to be doing. But even when you look at the hippie movement of the 60s, these were people, and they were all about sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And they were not only shunning cultural norms, they were shunning faith practices. And so it has been an antagonistic movement toward the Christian faith culturally in our country for a number of years. And so I think it was set up in an oppositional way. And so I think that's where many churches stand on it.
Again, I think I would use historically prohibition again. I wasn't around when prohibition was going on, but I'm a history buff, and that was something that drinking was something that you just did not do. And when it became legal, it became a little bit more accepted. The church still, as we said earlier, has this song and dance. But I think, particularly for Black church, I think there's always this song and dance around the sacred and the secular, right? I remember hearing my grandfather talk about when they were kids in Mississippi, the same people who were at the juke joint on Saturday night, the ones who were singing and performing there would be the same ones in the choir on Sundays, right? And so I think because, like you said, marijuana becomes this kind of secular thing that's identified with, and those who smoke it are identified as, sex, rock and roll, Snoop Dogg. Those are the people that we automatically identify. Education, again, like Alexander said, is a tool I think that we need to use. That we need to, if we're going to understand it completely, then folks who use on the regular who aren't high all day like Snoop Dogg or like Method Man or some of these famous people that we see that we're inundated with when we think of marijuana usage, there are some common people. And so the education piece, I think, is very, very important when we talk about it, particularly going forward now that it's legal, because this is going to be something that I think we struggle with for the next 5 to 10 years as it becomes more widespread legal across the country. I think as society continues to move and those younger generations, now the millennials, become older, I think those who come behind us will have a different mindset, different picture, different images of who these people are that consume marijuana, and it won't be strictly the images of Snoop Dogg and Method Man.
I think another important issue I don't want to overlook in that is the concerns of how much of a gateway drug is it. You hear scientists argue over this, but definitely even in our society, most people, especially churches, I think, feel like it's a gateway drug. And even, the famous Prince lyric, my cousin tried weed 1 month and now he's doing horse the next month. And so how much of a gateway drug, and even if on a chemical molecular level, it's not a gateway drug. Like I said, it impacts judgment. So you may be high, and so now someone can convince you to try, as we say at home in Chicago, that stuff, or heroin, or the next level of drug that's definitely not something that we're advocating legalization of or recreational use of. And so I think we have to think about the gateway issue.
I think that's a really good point that you bring up. You guys touched on something that I have to, and especially as Reverend said, he's a history buff, so I have to interject real quick, and I just want to throw this in there. From a historical perspective, right? There, and especially as this entire panel, this entire group is folks of color, we understand all too well that religion has really been looked at as like the spiritual arm of law enforcement as it pertains to the war on drugs, right? And we all know that growing up in church, the devil's lettuce is it's a sin, stay away from it. Do you feel like religion was, do you feel like religion could have been used as or weaponized in the fight or in the war on drugs? Because we've already established that the war on drugs was harmful to Black and brown communities. They disproportionately targeted Black and brown communities. Do you think that religion could have been hijacked, or historically was hijacked, to really push that message, particularly on communities of color?
Absolutely. I think from the beginning of time, religion has, and I think always will be, used as a weapon when it's in the hands of the wrong individuals. It was weaponized when it told Black people when they came to this country, serve your masters, slaves serve your masters with obedience. It was weaponized. It's been weaponized in a lot of ways. And I'm just thinking of the Book of Eli, the movie. Had the Bible gotten into the hands of the wrong individual, think about the pain that would have been inflicted on those people going forward. The guy that had an agenda wanted the Bible so that he could control others. And I think in a lot of ways, religion can control human behavior and not allow us to, I don't want to say live into who we are, but I'm always thinking of PKs who are under their parents' thumb, or church kids who are under their parents' thumb, and then they go to college and they just go buck wild, right? We've all experienced some folks like that who they did nothing wrong, and then when they got a little taste of freedom, they try everything because there was no opportunity to experience. I won't say experiment, but to experience some things and make choices on whether that's good for me or bad for me. That's something I want to try. And so I think part of growing up is the experience, the learning, and not necessarily We say all the time, kids don't do what they say they do, don't do what you tell them to do. They do what they see you do. And so they have to sometimes experience some things and make the decision for themselves if this is the way that they want to go. So I don't know. I don't know. I think I talked myself into a web. I'm confused now.
I think it's a bit complex, especially when you look at it historically. I'm not going to go far back. I'm going to go to the 80s because I think it's an important issue to think about, especially for our upcoming election and what people will say about the various candidates during the war on drugs. We were desperate communities. It impacted Black people bad, but Black communities were desperate. My father's church at the time, in the 1980s, was at 9448 South Eccleston. Don't think too hard. That's the little church across the street from Trinity. And I remember when we first started at that church. In that neighborhood. It was a neighborhood you could walk. We walked it even once the drug problem escalated. But my father was always a pastor who was tied to his community. He knew everybody up and down all the streets. And, we would walk down to Robichaud Park and have events and play basketball, and it was comfortable. But we saw that community turn. And I remember the midnight calls from my father's members picking up that their son had got caught up in drug and gang activity. And Pastor, can you come help me with the police at the jail? Or Pastor, he got shot. Can you come comfort my family? And so churches were as desperate as everybody else because we were facing dangerous, violent times. And so I don't know that it was weaponized. I think we were just all trying to find a way to cope and make it and survive and deal with what was going on. And so the war on drugs, we can Monday night quarterbacking now and think about all the missteps. But at the time, y'all, it was desperation. And so churches were just trying to play their role in helping stop the spread of the gang and drug violence and nurture to their people. And maybe sometimes we made bad decisions in that. And so I think when you look at that time period, it was a tricky time period. But I think the problem now is that we do have a lot of knowledge looking back, and some churches are still slow to evolve and learn how to minister to people where they are and learn how to work within the community in the way that we saw Christ himself work into the community. You never saw Christ shun somebody or turn him away, be it a prostitute or whatever. And so I think churches, some have been slower to evolve and do use it as a weapon, as a tool of fear to control people, while others have evolved and, they are doing much better ministry and connecting with people.
So as we are evolving into what's next, cannabis is destined to bring in a lot of revenue to the state. And the state has allocated funds for restoring, renewing, and reinvesting in the community. The program R3 has funding. Do you think that it is wrong for the church to receive R3 funding?
So I looked at that question. I was looking at the purposes of R3 funding. R3 funding isn't about the promotion and advocacy of cannabis. It's about delivering important community services in a range of areas to the community to address things that are problematic, be it, violence or whatever the case may be. And as long as the church is still an important and key player in providing those services to the community, I have no problem with them getting funding, because I don't want to play the quid pro quo game. You didn't like my idea, you went on my side, so you don't get no money. I just don't think that's the way to address that at all.
And what do you think, Reverend Tennial?
Those are the services of the church. And so they should receive the funding. I'll leave it at that. Yeah, I'll leave it there.
I guess that's a hot topic, huh?
I think it's interesting though that we could be against something, but if it's profitable and benefits us, there's something that's that makes me uncomfortable about that. And so we're reaping from the profits of the sales of marijuana. but then we want to say, don't do it. That's problematic for me in a lot of ways, and can even be described, I think, as hypocritical, because if you're actually against it, then you shouldn't take the funds from the profit. If we're going to be, if we're going to play it that way, I think that's how it should go. But if the churches are providing that service, then they should receive the funding to do that from those funds.
So are you all familiar with weed churches, or sometimes it's called pot churches? Because this is something that is becoming very popular. Do you feel that that's a legitimate faith-based community?
Let me say this. I was looking into that. It's clear and obvious that some of them are not faith-based. It is something that they're doing to skirt licensing laws or whatever it may be, so that they can partake in weed, but also sell it without having to go through all the compliance issues. That's what it was in many states before they became legal. At first, it's still in Indiana. In Indiana, they have weed churches. Indiana has not legalized. And so they're using it for that purpose. But to the extent that there are faiths that believe that cannabis is important to their faith practice, that's on them. The Rastafarian, it's a sacrament in the Rastafarian faith. It is a sacrament that they actually believe brings mental clarity that helps them connect better with God, as opposed to bringing in sobriety that impedes their connection with God. So to the extent that it's sincere and legitimate, more power to them. But we know that it's been used for purposes of skirting compliance and being able to sell without licenses or distribute without licenses and things of that nature.
Personally, just want to thank both of you, not only for myself, but for the viewers out there who might be struggling religiously and seeking some of those answers. So again, thank you so much. I just want to give you guys a second to shout yourselves out. Where can we follow you? I'm gonna go ahead and start with the Reverend. Please drop some handles. Where can we follow you at?
You can follow me on Twitter at the Book of John. That's all one word, the Book of Jon. That's my Twitter handle. And then if you're in the Chicago area, welcome to visit us at Calvary Baptist Church, 2309 East 80th Street. Right. But that is who I am. Thank you all for having me.
Rachel, please, where can we follow you? Where can we get some information from?
Although I have Twitter, and on Twitter, my handle is way too radical because I like to clown. But I feel I'm older than the pastor, and because I'm older than the pastor, y'all know my generation, we hang out on Facebook. And so I am Rachel Rouse Dawson on Facebook, and I am on there all the time.
And for anyone that might be thinking about or look interested in the church that you attend, where can they?
I am in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and I attend Bethel AME Church. It is a great church. If you're ever visiting Ann Arbor, we still have Hash Bash, so you might be in town for that. Come on over to Bethel and get filled with the Spirit.
Thank you all. Thank you all so much. We really appreciate your participation. This was an excellent discussion. Thank you so much for your insight.